teachers in middle school and high school had just quickly paged past those pages in the textbook, and then obviously had never assigned them, and the students knew nothing about evolution, tabula rasa completely. And of course, this is college, and of course, it's physical anthropology, so of course, day one. And after 2 or 3 weeks, these kids came up to her and said, well, of course species change through time. You mean that's evolution? We thought evolution meant you can't believe in God. So one thing is, when they actually learn what evolution really is, oftentimes that assuages their concerns as well.
So pardon me for asking another question, but hearing that answer, and I appreciate that answer about you need to know this, and whether you agree with it or not. How certain are we that the surveys about American opinion about evolution doesn't reflect something similar? So could it be that really 90% of Americans understand evolution and could say this is what mainstream science teaches and believes or accepts as being the evidence? I'll use that language. Instead of the 45%, because the question is formulated in the form of do you think it's true? And I just wonder how our concern about the survey matches up with the willingness to...
It's the wording of the question, stupid. The survey research is worthless unless you word the question properly and draw the sample properly. I think the way that John Miller worded the question in the survey that Jarek was talking about is a very good way to word it, much better than the way Gallup worded it, much better than the way most people worded it. And it was really very simple. It didn't clutter it up with age of the earth kinds of stuff like Gallup does and so forth. And I'm trying to remember exactly the way it was phrased. It was something like, humans evolved from other animals, true or false. Very simple. And so clearly the way the way the question is phrased is very important. If you go to our website, we've got a section on polls, which you can read, we might not have that section up yet, but we have some articles that we have published in reports of NCSC where we discuss this issue. I mean, just asking questions within the poll that refer to the Bible will bias your results. Anytime you bring religion into the poll, and other questions will tend to depress the number of people accepting evolution. Just stuff like that. So your point is well taken. You have to be very careful in survey research.
But even so, I think the numbers have been remarkably stable for decades. And they track up during more conservative periods of our times, and they track down to more liberal periods of our times. Not very much, exactly. It's a few percentage points up and down, but it's remarkably stable over a long period of time back into the 60s.
And actually, we were talking about these surveys and polls, but actually there's a very large body of research done in qualitative research on Americans' understanding of evolution, and it corroborates a lot of there are a lot of Americans who don't understand evolutionary theory.
All right, we'll take one more question.
So my question has to do with kind of the logic behind the truth of evolution. And I really enjoyed science when I was growing up. I took 2 classes of physics in high school. My son actually had a couple classes with Dr. Williams over here. And yet, so I think I understand science and I understand the theory of evolution pretty well, but I reject it as true. I guess I consider myself a younger creationist. And what I see in your survey of the 97% number, I forgot, was that scientists who believe evolution is true, something like that? Dr. Scott used the 90. So if you have a community of scientists that essentially rejects the supernatural, believing in natural process for everything to happen, then even when it looks like there might be some kind of intelligent designer or creator, their philosophical point of view or scientific point of view, however you want to call it, says that's not an option. So you end up with only one possibility. And yet I think we'd all agree at some logical, rational level, there's sort of this two camps, at least here in the United States, in the denying creation stories that we mentioned earlier. So I guess, is there a challenge there in our logic of excluding a possibility because it isn't naturalistic, and therefore missing out?
I think it's excluded because it's not science. If I'm understanding your question correctly.
The Pew survey that showed the 97% of scientists accepting evolution was, the sample was chosen from AAAS, which was a different sample than the other survey that I showed from Eglin and Scheidel, which was a survey of scientists from elite institutions. So those were two separate institutions, or two separate samples. The Eklund and Scheidel survey showed approximately 30% of natural scientists believed in God or a higher power. The point of showing the data from that second sample was to show that even among elite institutions, where the percentage of scientists believing in God is the lowest, it's higher at state institutions and higher yet at community colleges. I didn't present those data, but it's closer to like 40–45% at community colleges, was to try to demonstrate the fact that it is not, that the stereotype of the scientist as atheist is simply not true, which comes as a great blow to both the atheist scientists as well as to conservative Christians who would like to believe that all scientists are atheists. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about science and religion, both among conservative Christians as well as among atheist scientists. And turning down the volume would be very helpful on both sides. It's a complicated subject. I think a little more understanding of philosophy of science would be helpful. Assuming the solution to your problem, as I think you were suggesting, that if you assume that there is no supernatural, then obviously you're going to come up with only naturalistic explanations. Clearly, you are assuming your conclusion. That's not a very good reasoning procedure. But I think that is not an explanation for the high percentage of scientists who accept evolution. I think the high percentage of scientists that accept evolution, such as reflected in that Pew survey, is not explained by the high percentage of scientists that are atheists, because it is far in excess of the number of scientists who are atheists. I think it is much more readily explained by the quality of the data supporting evolution, which you certainly are free to reject, but which I believe the majority of scientists find very compelling.
I think the follow on that is that from those numbers is that therefore a lot of actually religious scientists still reject intelligent design as an explanation for nature because they essentially recognize that it's not being a scientific explanation and in its core being essentially a religious explanation. So in the dividing line between what is science and what is not, what's a scientific explanation for how our world works versus one is not, I think people who are religious nonetheless have the ability to distinguish those, and people who are atheistic similarly have the ability to distinguish those. And it's the keeping those two straight that is actually the issue for a lot of us, and the conflation of those two issues is actually one of the biggest service that's actually being foisted on our public here, this idea that there is a debate between creationism or intelligent design and science and evolution. And in fact, for most religious faiths, there is no such conflict.
Yeah, I can second that. I know dozens and dozens of science teachers that I've worked with in the past, and would say the vast majority of them are religious in some capacity.